I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember, bacon makes everything better.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this special edition of the David Glenn Show, now seen and heard exclusively here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Thank you for joining us. On Saturday, the East Carolina football team lost 45-28 to an undefeated and nationally ranked Army squad. On Sunday, ECU Athletic Director John Gilbert announced the immediate dismissal of sixth-year Pirates coach Mike Houston, who finished 2-10 last season and was 3-4 so far this year. As we bring on our guest, quick review. Mike Houston arrived in Greenville before the 2019 season as a guy who had been a very successful head coach at Lenoir-Rhyne at the Division II level, then the Citadel and James Madison at the FCS level. He even led JMU to the FCS National Championship in 2016 during his first season there. Houston did lead ECU to bowl invitations during his third and fourth seasons in Greenville, but his record fell all the way to that 2-10 in 2023. And of course, there is a good chance the Pirates will miss a bowl again this year. Our good friend Jonathan Ellerby lives in Greenville and runs Pirate Radio, which has been the voice of the Pirate Nation for decades. He is also a longtime friend of the David Glenn Show. On Twitter, you can follow his crew at PR927FM. That's their place on the FM dial in that part of our great state, PR927FM. Jonathan attended John Gilbert's press conference in Greenville on Sunday afternoon. Hello, Jonathan. Thanks for joining us on the David Glenn Show. How are you?
Hello, DG. Thanks for having me, man. It's an honor. It's not your normal Sunday here in Greenville, North Carolina.
Amen to that. It seems weird, Jonathan, that the Army game was the last one, right? It's a road trip. It's an undefeated Army team. It's a nationally ranked Army team. That could not have been the single thing that pushed John Gilbert over the edge as he evaluated Mike Houston and this football program. When you think of either what the athletic director said at his press conference or whatever you've gathered from all your sources at ECU and around Greenville, what do you believe were the biggest factors in Mike Houston's dismissal?
Well, John Gilbert said it today. He said it was performance. And I guess the decline of Mike Houston's performance, 2-10, was horrible last year and one of the worst seasons in ECU football history. And then, I think ultimately this year, if you look at it, losing to Appalachia State and then getting blown out at Charlotte, those were probably the two big ones. And then just, the awful play at Army yesterday, even though they are in the top 25, I think probably there was enough pressure for John Gilbert to go ahead and make the call. And it puts East Carolina in an interesting situation, with 5 games to go, an interim coach. But certainly gives also John Gilbert the opportunity to get a jump on the coaching search. So there's a lot of different ways things can develop over the next few weeks, and we'll just have to see what happens. But Mike Houston, was the right hire at the right time, it seemed like, when he brought here, because he was a guy that's been able to turn programs around and did that when he was here. Now, the only difference is he did it with a guy named Holton Ahlers. And I think if you look at really what the lack of success for Mike Houston's been is when Holton Ahlers has not been the quarterback, East Carolina has had no quarterback. And that was why we were 2-10 last year. And that's why East Carolina continues to struggle this year, even though they went in the portal and brought in 2 guys.
You may have just partially answered my next question. And of course, we're going to ask Jonathan to look forward at potential candidates, et cetera. But before we do that, ECU still does have a chance to reach 6 wins. The next 3 opponents, actually, Temple, Florida Atlantic, and Tulsa, are all having very difficult seasons themselves. So you mentioned John Gilbert getting a jump on the coaching search. Is that the full answer to the why now question? Because it's at least conceivable that Mike Houston could have gotten them to 6-6 in another bowl game, maybe.
Yeah, it's also conceivable Blake Harrell, who's the new interim head coach, could make things uncomfortable for John Gilbert as well. I asked John Gilbert if Blake Harrell was going to be a candidate, and he didn't say yes, he didn't say no. But if the guy goes 5-0 down the stretch, and as you just mentioned, the next few games are very, very winnable. I mean, that's where things get interesting when you make a midseason change. Yes, you go ahead and eliminate the guy that's the current head coach from being here next year, but it also, because if the players rally around Blake Harrell and you start rattling off some wins, I mean, you saw that happen with Georgia Tech. They kept their guy a few years ago, but so that's interesting. But it's also an opportunity for John Gilbert. I said, I guess, to go ahead and start asking around and maybe go ahead and finding a guy, because it is important in this day and age to have a guy in place as soon as possible when that window opens for the transfer portal.
One last kind of present and recent past question, and then we'll look forward. I introduced you in part by saying, you run Pirate Radio. I've considered y'all a great friend, you personally, but also your whole crew for many, many years now. And I love to use the phrase, the voice of the Pirate Nation, given that you and your team kind of open the airwaves and listen to what Pirate Nation says truly on a daily basis. How would you summarize, the voices against Mike Houston? Was this something that had built to a crescendo where, some enormous percentage of ECU fans wanted a change?
Yeah, I think the drum had been banging for a while, and we do a fifth quarter call-in show after every game, and certainly, I think the real one that really set it off was the 31 blowout at Charlotte. I mean,
Yeah.
It was just like that's a team. I think East Carolina looks at themselves, and I think one of the struggles right now with East Carolina is what's our identity? Because if you look around the schools around us, and I'm not talking about the ACC schools, I'm talking about Liberty, App, Charlotte, Coastal Carolina, the teams around East Carolina, and particularly Charlotte and App. East Carolina has not had success with them under Mike Houston, so I think that was very frustrating to the Pirate Nation, and especially Charlotte, because their team that's just started football 12 years ago, and so now they've risen to the conference. I think it's a good thing that they're a rival and could be, play them year in and year out. But certainly to go 0-2 in the American Athletic Conference when East Carolina's been in this conference for a decade, I think that has been extremely frustrating in the way East Carolina has lost to. And East Carolina just hasn't had a lot of success. I mean, we're 41-72 in the last decade since East Carolina fired Ruffin McNeil, from 5-7. Then the Scotty years where it was 3-9 was the norm. And then, as I said, Mike Houston was bringing it back and then just fell so bad last year. So I think the move to get rid of Mike Houston is more favorable than not.
In sports, we talk a lot about impact players who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network.
This segment brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more online at AtlanticTireOnline.com.
Jonathan Ellerby of Pirate Radio is joining us on the David Glenn Show. He's right there in Greenville. His crew is heard all over the eastern part of our state, including right there in that great city. All right, glancing forward, obviously it's an incredibly early stage, so we don't expect you to have a perfect crystal ball. But what are some of the first names worth mentioning in your eyes as possible targets for ECU, or maybe even probable targets for ECU?
Well, I think one of the first names I think is worth mentioning is Skip Holtz for multiple reasons. He came here and did what East Carolina needs now, which is he rallied the troops out of a hole and built a successful program that won back-to-back conference championships. And that's what John Gilbert said his expectation. He says he has high expectations for this East Carolina football program. When asked what those high expectations were, it was bowl games and competing for conference championships. I think a guy like Skip Holtz can do that because he comes in and runs it like a CEO when he was here before. And I think he can do that again now because you saw his success in the UFL. I think he can assemble a coaching staff. And I think the one great thing Skip was great at was fundraising too. And I think why East Carolina is in the bind it is right now is because of the three-letter word we all know, NIL. And I think you got to have a coach that's a fundraiser and that can friend raise to get people into the stands. And I think Skip Holtz is a name, and he's also available right now if he would take your phone call and be interested in coming back to coaching this, or if his, I don't know what his answer would be, but I think he would be somebody that would be worth kicking the tires for what I just mentioned. You can also look at, the Garrett Rileys and the Joe Sloans. There's a lot of fans that, want them. Joe played here and under Skip Holtz, was with Skip Holtz, but also those guys, are at big programs at Clemson and LSU. And are their sights set bigger? And is that job better than coming and being the head coach at East Carolina? And also the other wild card too, when would they be available if they're in the college football playoff, DG? As I mentioned, that transfer portal is going to open up in December. I mean, I just kind of feel like East Carolina needs to have somebody boots on the ground to be sure that there's not a mass exodus of players, but also that if there is, that you can also be out and be active in getting a team that can win now, because that's what it's all about in college football right now, winning now. And I think Pirate Nation is not going to, no one's in a rebuilding program anymore. Everybody's like, hey, look, what are we doing this year? So I think those are some names that you can, look at. But, John Gilbert played his cards pretty close to the vest today at the press conference, wouldn't elaborate if the person needed head coaching experience. As I said, does Blake Harrell make it really interesting over the next 3, 4, 5 weeks that could, make his name the head coach? So we'll just have to wait and see.
For those who don't know, Joe Sloan, as Jonathan mentioned, was a walk-on at ECU, spent 5 years in the Pirates uniform, and he is currently the offensive coordinator at LSU, making about $1 million a year right now. Yes, we live in a world where coordinators make seven figures. Obviously, Mike Houston was paid well more than $2 million a year at ECU. So financially, you could offer Joe Sloan of LSU a raise to be ECU's head football coach. Garrett Riley at Clemson, by the way, the offensive coordinator there, makes a little bit closer to $2 million a year. So both financially and in terms of, as Jonathan said, do they have their eyes set in a different place? It's a little bit more complicated than it used to be when it comes to just offering your head coaching job to a prominent coordinator. It's interesting that John Gilbert would not specify whether head coaching experience is required. Do you have a sense, again, as the folks who host the Voice of the Pirate Nation, do you have a sense of a consensus in the fan base? Not that John Gilbert is listening necessarily, but are they on board with Skip Holtz? Are they dying for a young offensive coordinator? Would they be okay with somebody who doesn't have head coaching experience? Can you tell?
From my experience is the Pirate name. I think someone like Skip Holtz and his charm, and he's been here before, he could win over a majority. No one's ever going to win over 100%, as you know, but he could win over the majority because of his track record, his charm, and he knows what to say. He says all the right, and he was successful too. So it would be hard to I think to be a naysayer if Skip was hired, because I do think what would come down is Skip could fundraise, Skip could win the fans back, and then I think he could put together a staff that could be a winner. One of the things that really stood out in the press conference today is John Gilbert talked about NIL so much that he said usually the teams are spending the most in NIL are at the top of their conference. Well, at the top of the American right now are two undefeated teams that are military institutions with no NIL. So it's kind of like, it's a big head scratcher. Their Army and Navy are everything right in college football, but everything wrong in how they're doing it, according to the rules that we know that you got to spend the most to win the most.
With something you mentioned earlier in mind about, actually, I saw on a pirate radio show, I think it was Clip Brock was interviewing John Gilbert, the athletic director, and Clip asked, as he often does, a great question. John's answer about sort of the future of ECU in this wild, unpredictable world of realignment and name, image, likeness, and transfer portal, et cetera. He said that as the athletic director, two things had to happen. ECU had to strongly fund all of the sports that it still has, and then you have to win on the field if you ever want to be desirable for a different league. And Gilbert made clear to Clip in the interview that I saw, that at the current time, he believes the American Athletic Conference is the right place for the Pirates. But with the AAC in mind, and I think you brought up a great point, falling behind the Charlotte 49ers, now a member of the same league as ECU, when the 49ers have only been playing major college football for a dozen years, that was a bad idea. That is somewhere on the short list of why Mike Houston is no longer the coach. Do you have a sense, Jonathan, now that Cincinnati's no longer in the league, Houston is no longer in the league, UCF is no longer in the league, they're all in the Big 12. SMU won the AAC last year, but now, of course, is in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Do you have a sense where the Pirates rank in terms of their budget, their stadium size, their NIL money in this new look AAC, where some of the toughest opponents have departed over the last several years?
Yeah, I think now East Carolina is in a good position. I think that's what makes it so frustrating that we saw this transition before. When East Carolina was kind of left behind in Conference USA, and that's when Ruff and McNeil won 10 games that year back in 2013. And that's when FIU joined Conference USA, and East Carolina was still there and was able to perform. And I think that's what's so frustrating with East Carolina fans, because I think when I got back to our identity, we used to be the teams that used to be able to go to Raleigh, Chapel Hill. That's the teams that East Carolina could rattle and get some wins. And now East Carolina, as I said, I don't feel like we're the best of the teams around us outside the ACC. So I feel like John Gilbert said today at the press conference that the Pirate Club has set record numbers. They're at an all-time high. The facilities, we're ready to break ground in the spring for an indoor practice facility. So he says the support is there, the money is there. So what's the variable that's missing right now? And it's got to be getting the right players or coaching the current players that there's something missing there. There needs to be some alignment with East Carolina athletics from top to bottom of here's where we go. And that's why, I just mentioned Skip Holtz just because he came in here, did a uber successful golf tournament, raising money, outside of ECU athletics for the Drew Skip golf tournament. And it was just in his compensation package, a lot of it was based on season tickets. And we got up to over 20,000 season tickets at a time when Skip Holtz was here. And that was before the Boneyard where the End Zone project was full. So I just kind of feel like we need that sort of person. We need a person that everybody can rally behind and has one message and one heartbeat that can get the purple and gold pumping again.
Last thing for you, we're, of course, going to cover ECU stuff at our website, ncsportsnetwork.com. But, Jonathan, remind folks, given your many, many years at Pirate Radio, how can folks find what you do on the air and otherwise?
Yeah, check us out. We're on the air on 92.7 in Greenville, 104.1 in Washington, North Carolina. And then, at PR927 FM is our social media handle on Instagram, X, Facebook. So we stream everything. We're on YouTube at Pirate Radio TV. So a lot of places to find your content this day and age. But we'll be covering it all week. Got a lot of things in store. Former quarterback Holt Nailers is a part of our team here. He's going to be doing shows this week, taking phone calls. He has an opinion of it. Obviously, the guy, well connected with Mike Houston of going to back-to-back bowl invites and winning that Birmingham Bowl. So there's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot to speculate too. So it's good to have a lot of issues like this when you're in the sports media business, because there's a lot of directions this thing can go.
Just so you know, I have several Pirate Radio shirts that you and others have given me over the years. I have them in my rotation when I work out at the gym. And every single time I wear a Pirate Radio shirt, somebody says something about having listened to you guys and enjoyed your work over the years. So
I appreciate it.
I consider all you guys good friends. Thanks for your support over the years. Thanks for joining us on this kind of emergency edition of the David Glenn Show. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, David, and appreciate your friendship and partnership as well. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Right back at you. And thanks to all of you for joining us today on this special edition of the David Glenn Show.